Hello, everybody. My name is Brendan Scott, and I'm the historian in residence with Cavan County Council during this decade of Centenaries period. And what I want to talk to you about this evening are the attacks in Swanlinbar, which took place on the RIC and which then Crown Forces took onto the streets of Swanlinbar in December 1920, and with a little bit of follow-on trouble as well in the new year in 1921. So that's what I'm going to be talking about this evening. So on the 17th of December 1920 at about 9:30 p.m, while out on a night patrol, a small group of RIC constables under the command of one Sergeant Moran was attacked by IRA volunteers on the north end of Swanlinbar in West Cavan. And during that attack, Constable Peter Shannon of the RIC, a 35-year-old Roscommon native, was shot dead. 2 days after this, on the night of the 19th of December, the RIC took their revenge, carrying out a rampage through Swanlinbar and targeting people and businesses whom they believed, rightly or wrongly, to have had involvement in this attack, which had left one of their own men dead. And this short webisode, as I say, will discuss these events and their consequences in a small village in West Cavan. So the man who was shot, Peter Shannon, he was born on the 14th of March 1884, the son of Peter and Bridget Shannon, who were Catholic farmers in Mulligan, County Roscommon. In the 1901 census, he was listed as being 16 years old. He was a scholar and living with his parents, two brothers and two sisters. On the 7th of June 1915, Peter, by now an RIC constable stationed in Ballyghamesduff and Cavan, had married Mary Catherine McDermott, with whom he had two children. Mary Kate, as she was known, very, very tragically died at the age of 28 on the 25th of May 1917 in Ballyghamesduff of septicemia following childbirth, which very sadly at that time wasn't that unusual. The three RIC men, this is a piece from the Freeman's Journal about the attack. The three RIC men, Sergeant Charles Moran, Sergeant Halligan and Constable Peter Shannon, were fired upon by a group of IRA men on the night of 17th of December. And in the short exchange of fire which took place, Shannon, who was aged in his mid-30s at the time, was shot while jumping a wall for cover. And he died about half an hour later in a cottage owned by a woman called Agnes Fee, where he had been taken following the shootout. None of the assailants seemed to have been injured during this attack. And the local curate, Father J. Sheridan, was called to the scene to administer the last rites, which he did. Shortly after the gunfight, the IRA volunteers approached the house of Constable Byrne, another RIC man who lived in Mill Street in Swanlinbar. The constable opened the door, was fired upon, and was wounded in his arm. The party then went to the house of another RIC constable, a man called Mulligan, who was not home at the time, but in the barracks instead. And we will hear more from Byrne and Mulligan later on in this short talk. Now, Sergeant Halligan, who was one of the RIC men attacked that night, estimated that about 150 men were involved in the ambush, which seems to be a great exaggeration, following which 4 or 5 locals who were from Swanlinbar went on the run. He mentioned one man who was caught and charged for his suspected involvement in the ambush. And it may be that this was a guy called John McManus, who is described as a boot merchant, who was arrested following the attack in Swanlinbar and committed Ballykinlar prison camp in County Down, from which he was released in July 1921, probably as a result of the signing of the truce that month. A newspaper also mentioned a guy called Patrick McGovern from Gaeltacht, who was also arrested and sent to Enniskillen at this time. Now, shortly after the attack on the 17th, the RIC sent up flares, which were known as very lights, calling for backup, and the Crown Forces began to take the revenge. One house, which was a home upstairs and a butcher's shop downstairs, run by a woman called Catherine Macaulay, was destroyed in the early hours of the 18th, so the early morning following the attack on the 17th. And this house was destroyed by the backup, which had arrived in the town shortly after Shannon's death. Now, Catherine claimed compensation for this, and we get a lot of information from the assizes where people claim compensation after these attacks. And at the Cavan assizes in early 1921, Catherine Macaulay was questioned over her compensation claim, during which she recounted the events of that night. So, according to Catherine, in the early hours of the morning following the death of Peter Shannon, three unidentified men came to her door. The children were still awake on what had undoubtedly been a tense night, so it's probably not surprising that they're still awake at such a late hour. And Catherine, realizing that the men had petrol, called to them not to go to bed, called to the children not to go to bed, as the house is going to be burned, which it was, making Catherine and her family homeless. Catherine's husband was 73 years old and seems to have been infirm, and at least one of her sons was of working age and was away. And at the assizes, she was asked what kind of men, what class of men were they that burned her house. And Catherine claimed that they wore khaki and came in motor cars from Fermanagh. The implication being, of course, that these were soldiers or Crown forces in some way. The judge, really interestingly, the judge tried to stop Catherine from giving that answer, but she got the answer out too quickly for the judge to stop her. And it seems that the judge didn't want identifying features of the Crown forces to be mentioned in court. And this is something that you see later on in another case connected to this one. Now, why Catherine was targeted isn't known, nor was it brought up in court. And one early newspaper report, the early newspaper reports are very muddled up, very contradictory on this story. And one early report stated that the household had refused admission to the dying constable and his entourage, but that's not mentioned anywhere else, so we don't know. But either way, Catherine was awarded £750 for the damages. So that was the night of the 17th going into the 18th. But it was the night of the 19th of December that the Crown forces truly took their revenge on Swanlinbar in an astonishingly aggressive and open reprisal. As well as Catherine Macaulay, who we just met, Enniskillen Rural Council on their 4th of January meeting were inundated with compensation claims from Patrick Young. These are all people of Swanlinbar, from Patrick Leonard, I should say, John Young, Swanlinbar Creamery Society, and Patrick Dolan, all arising from the destruction of their property in Swanlinbar caused by Crown forces on the night of the 19th of December. Patrick Leonard, whose house was burned and who was threatened with shooting, and who also saw his hay, straw, corn, turf, byre, hen house and turf house burned, as well as 40 fowl killed, claimed £1,043. John Young, who was the owner of the market house, which saw slates and windows destroyed and from which potatoes were stolen, claimed £50 in compensation. Patrick Dolan claimed £500 for the destruction of wine, whiskey, gin, rum, brandy, and porter. And again, Catherine Macaulay applied to the northern side, from the Fermanagh side, I should say, for compensation for the burning of her house. So she applied for £1,500 in Enniskillen for that. And we've a number in the Dolphin Archive, which was donated to Cavan Library in the last couple of years. There are a number of these little reports as to what happened in Swanlinbar. And this is an archive material, a fantastic archive, which was taken by a guy called Frank Dolphin, who's the intelligence officer for the IRA in Ballyconnell. And his son Frankie very kindly donated this material to the library service in Cavan. So you can see here, this is a note about the creamery being destroyed by fire caused by Crown forces on the night of the 9th of December 1921. Now they're a year ahead of themselves. It was actually 1920. Here's another one. This is the damage done to Patrick Dolan's. So 200 weight and 4 stone of sugar destroyed, 12 pounds of tobacco taken by Crown forces on the night of the 19th of December 1920, by 30 gallons of stout, 60 gallons of whiskey, 10 gallons of something else, I'm not sure what that is, 25 gallons of ginger wine, 33 gallons of port wine, all destroyed. And there was also window, lamps, and mirrors broken, 72 pounds taken on the same night by Crown forces. Then another note in the Dolphin Archive is dealing with Patrick Leonard, whose dwelling house furniture, including beds, bedding, kitchen utensils, destroyed. Office houses, including byres, stables, and fowl house destroyed. Farm produce destroyed, 30 tons of hay, a ton of corn, 1 ton of straw. Loss of crops by 2 sons on the run. There was 3 acres of oats and 2 acres of potatoes. And according to this report taken by Frank Dolphin, this was all lost. So it was very, very bad. The Creamery Society applied for £3,000 compensation, a significant figure that, for the burning of the creamery building and premises, as well as machinery and stock. All the applications were referred to the council's solicitor, and judgments and payments were deferred. So they went looking at Cavan as well to see what they could get there. And the compensation cases eventually were held in Fermanagh County Court in January. And the judge awarded £700 to Patrick Leonard, £151 to John Young, who seems to have increased his claim. He was only looking for £50 originally, and then he get 151, so he increased the claim, and then £2,200 to the Creamery Society. Now, disregarding eyewitness reports, Judge Johnson, who's the guy who made these awards, opined, and this is a quote, that there was no evidence before him to show that the destruction was the work of the armed forces of the Crown, despite numerous eyewitness reports to it. Johnson also disagreed. The county had to pay these sort of compensation costs, and in Cavan they had decreed that the cost should be gone 50-50 between Fermanagh and Cavan, because the men who destroyed all this stuff came from Fermanagh. So Johnson disagreed with the 50-50 verdict that Cavan had come up with. So Fermanagh were saying, no, we're not going to pay 50% of this. And he instead decreed that Fermanagh would only bear 1/20th of the costs, as the incidents had taken place in Cavan, and Cavan County Council weren't represented at this court case. So as far as Judge Johnson was concerned, Fermanagh had not been implicated in the attacks at all, so they shouldn't have to pay 50% of the costs. But it wasn't just the ordinary people in Swanlinbar who were claiming compensation for the events of those days in question. The RIC in Swanlinbar had previously received a warning notice, but it is not known what the exact nature of the warning was, probably along the lines of we're going to burn down the barracks or something like that. Sergeant Moran, who was one of the guys we mentioned earlier, he had 8 children, and he was badly injured in the attack on the 17th, and he later claimed 2,000 compensation at the Cavan Quarter Sessions in April 1921. He had already brought the case to court, but it had been postponed to allow the judge the chance to ascertain the permanence and severity of Morahan's injuries. Now, according to Morahan's representation, the RIC had told him he must retire at the age of 44 due to the severity of his injuries. This Moran did, with a purely financial loss of £4,940, and he was also left a physical wreck. This was his quote, he was a physical wreck. He was left with pains in his legs, in his back, in his eyes, and his head, and was now partially deaf in his right ear. There was a long discussion at the assizes over Morahan's possible diagnosis of shell shock and the deterioration of his health since the attack. Eventually, Moran was awarded the £2,000 he had claimed, with 1/3 levied on Fermanagh and 2/3 levied on Cavan. Now, it'd be interesting to see what Fermanagh thought of that particular award being made. Another guy called Constable Francis Byrne, who we mentioned earlier on, he made a claim at the Cavan Quarter Sessions for £3,000 for maiming to person. That was the quote, maiming to person, on the night of the 17th of December. Following the attack, if you recall, people came to his house and attacked him at his house, in which Byrne was wounded by a gunshot in the arm. He and his wife had managed to hold off the attackers until help arrived. Byrne was later brought to the Fermanagh County Hospital, where he was operated on successfully. And although his wife escaped physically unharmed, it was claimed at the Quarter Sessions that she was suffering from shock, and firstly was admitted to the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast, and thereafter was sent to the country, as they called it, on the recommendation of the doctor to convalesce. Byrne's home was broken up after this as well. He received not half as much as he thought he was going to get. He received £283 and 6 shillings, with £101 of that to be levied on Fermanagh, with the remainder to be paid in Cavan. So he'd been looking for £3,000, and he ends up with £283 and 6 shillings. Now, Patrick Dolan, who we mentioned a minute ago as well, he claimed £500 at the April Assizes in Cavan for the damage to his pub and the destruction of contents, including, as I said, rum and whiskey and wine, on the night of the 19th of December. This was a repeat of his hearing at an earlier Assizes, and this time he produced a stock book. They felt, well, it shows the proof that all this stuff was destroyed. And Dolan further stated that he'd been fired at, but that he hadn't been injured. Dolan also claimed the reimbursement of £72, which he said had been kept for safekeeping in his premises, upstairs in his premises, for an old couple called Maguire. But he claimed that this money was now missing, after the raid on his premises. And there was a lengthy cross-examination regarding the value and the volume of the stock that had been lost. And there was a big, long discussion at the assizes about this. And following which, the judge awarded £45, and his opinion was that the claim had been greatly exaggerated, and he totally ignored the claim for £72, which had been stolen from the house. Now, Shannon's death was roundly condemned by the local Catholic clergy, and that Mass is celebrated 2 days later. That happened on the Friday, and on the Sunday, this is before the attack in the town, Father Sheridan, who had been the man who'd given last rites, and the parish priest, Father P. O'Reilly, both roundly condemned the shooting. Dr. Finnegan, who is the Catholic Bishop of Kilmore, also sent a missive to be read out at churches in the locality. And it's a long, long piece, and it's in the Anglo-Celt. But the opening salvo reads thus: "What am I to say to those who from outside ordered this wicked deed? Nothing, no words of mine will affect them. What am I to say to the actual murderers? Nothing. I leave them to the justice of God. He will punish them." And this set the tone for what was an excoriating condemnation of the murder of Peter Shannon and those who had carried it out. Now, the inquest into Shannon's death was held on the 21st of December by a military court of inquiry chaired by Colonel Sebastian Smith. And at this inquiry, one member of the RIC patrol, it doesn't say which one, stated that they were fired upon by rifle, revolver, and shotgun shot. And this witness, this RIC man, saw Shannon jump in the wall, where he was shot at point-blank range 3 times with a revolver. The unnamed witness went on to say that he heard Shannon moaning and saw him attempt to get back over the wall that he had jumped across and try and get back onto the road, but to no avail. He was so badly injured he couldn't do it. Another witness, again unnamed, deposed that a girl had told of moans she heard in a field close to the village. And this unnamed witness went for the priest and later found Shannon lying, bleeding inside the wall, where he was unable to speak. Remember, he couldn't get over the wall to get back out onto the road. And as I say, we don't know who said that. Shannon's body was formally identified by his brother, himself a former RIC sergeant. A medical witness who was called informed the court of a bullet wound, which was 2 inches long in the constable's right temple. It was, as the quote went, a clean triangular wound 2 inches long above the arch of the left eyebrow. There was no exit wound. There were 2 other bullets in the left and right thigh and another close-range shot to Shannon's abdomen. So the other guy had said 3 shots, but the coroner said 4. And the court found, unsurprisingly, that Shannon was willfully murdered by some person or persons unknown, the cause of death being laceration to the brain from the effects of a bullet wound. And in the civil registration of his death, it was recorded that Shannon died from shock and hemorrhage from laceration of brain caused by a bullet wound. And it was reported that after Shannon's death, who remember he was from Roscommon, all of the shops and houses in Elphin were shuttered. And following the court of inquiry into his death, Shannon's remains were returned to Elphin, where his funeral and burial took place, at which it was reported in the paper there were everywhere signs of mourning at the sad occurrence. Now, at the quarter sessions in Cavan following Shannon's death, Eileen Flynn from Ballyhadreen in Roscommon, who is Shannon's sister, claimed £10,000 for Peter's death because she said she was the guardian now of his children, who were aged 3.5 and 4.5. And remember, their mother had died a few years previously, so now they were orphans. She also claimed £1,000 on her own behalf, Eileen, Peter's sister, for Peter's death. Judge Brown awarded £2,000 in respect of the children and refused Eileen's claim for £1,000 altogether. The judge also appointed Peter's brother, the fellow who'd been the sergeant, as joint guardian, with the children's money to be lodged in court and paid out as required. Now, the violence that occurred on the 17th and the 19th didn't stop there, and there was ramifications. And there's a note in the Dolphin Archive which refers to a corn mill which the RIC had destroyed or had forced closed on the 22nd of December. So the following day, there's a corn mill that had to be closed for 6 months. And more seriously, on the 5th of January, 1921, at around 3 p.m., Sergeant Patrick Mulligan, who was Constable Patrick Mulligan at the time in January 21, led a small force in a motor lorry to the house of a small farmer named Peter Maguire of Knockrow in Swanlinbar, searching for his son, Owen. Now, Mulligan believed that Owen Maguire had been involved in the attack on the 17th of December. And speaking on a court case which Maguire later took against Mulligan, Peter stated that he had known Mulligan for roughly 2 years, having sold him turf in the past. Mulligan, when Mulligan gets to Maguire's house, Mulligan allegedly ran over Maguire's dog and shot it. With Constable Allen, who was a black and tan, who had accompanied Mulligan, later doing the same, later shooting the dog as well. 2 other constables remained on the road outside, and when they were questioned, claimed not to witness the assault or hear any shots or know of anything that went on. Mulligan and Maguire and Allen approached Maguire, and according to Maguire, and began to verbally abuse him and fire shots close to him to frighten him, before striking Maguire with a revolver, with the butt of a revolver, and kicking him. Mulligan continued to beat Peter Maguire, forcing Peter into the house as he did so. There, he searched both Maguire and the house for Owen and for anything else he could find on Peter, and later pushed the hapless Peter into a dunghill. And when questioned at court about this, Peter said that his son Owen had been gone for 3 days and that he didn't know where he was. Mulligan told Maguire during the attack on the 5th of January, Mulligan told Maguire that Peter Maguire would be the next man to be shot in Swanlinbar, and also that his son would die. Mulligan then went out to the back of the house where Maguire's son had been recently working, and it said that he readied his revolver for use. When asked by the judge what Maguire believed Mulligan was doing, Maguire replied that he believed that Mulligan was going to shoot his son for being, as Maguire said, for the crime of being alive in the world, so that he was an innocent man, and Mulligan was going to shoot him for no reason. Allen, the black and tan, told Maguire to say some prayers and to act no mind as to what had happened. Maguire stated in court, in fairness to Allen, Maguire stated in court that had Allen not been there, he believed that Mulligan would have killed him. Allen, incidentally, by the time the court case was taken, had emigrated to Canada, so wasn't available to be cross-examined about this. Owen Maguire, who was the man that Mulligan was looking for, ironically had been a former RIC man himself. He had been convicted in 1918 for unlawful assembly, which, anyone who showed up anywhere around that time was being convicted for unlawful assembly. He actually witnessed the attack on his father. He had been out the back doing work when Mulligan arrived, and Owen, with a presence of mind, managed to hightail out the back and hide. And he witnessed the attack on his father, having hidden behind a ditch in a field at the back of the house. And he claimed that Mulligan and Allen had rifles, not revolvers, but otherwise he agreed with the account his father gave, in as much as he could. And although Owen had met Mulligan a number of times following the incident on the 17th of December, there had been no issue. So it seems possible that Mulligan had received some information that Owen Maguire had been involved in the attack. But the day after the attack on his father, Mulligan met Owen coming from the church and forced Maguire to his knees, forced young Owen to his knees, making him swear against Sinn Féin and murderous gangs and such things as these. That's the quote that Owen gave in court, which Owen did, unsurprisingly, given there was a guy threatening to kill him. Mulligan, however, when he was cross-examined in court, stated that Peter Maguire's injuries were sustained during a search of his person, which Mulligan claimed Maguire had strenuously resisted. So Mulligan was saying, that Peter Maguire was strenuously resisting this search, and that he got injured in the course of resisting, and that if he hadn't resisted, he wouldn't have been injured. He claimed that being pinned against a rough wall accounted for Maguire's injuries. Mulligan also claimed that only one shot was fired, and this by Constable Allen, who by this time is in Canada, so can't be got for it. So Mulligan claims that only one shot was fired at the Maguire's dog, because Maguire's dog had attacked them. This is what Mulligan said. Mulligan denied shooting the dog, or that Allen had tried to prevent him from shooting the dog, stating in court that I would take no instructions from anyone else there. Mulligan also stated that he never called Maguire any names, stating that he had always found him a decent old man and had nothing against him. Constables John Mahan and Michael Coleman backed up Mulligan's evidence and said that they saw nothing and couldn't account for what Maguire was saying. Peter had been recently widowed and was assisted afterwards by Michael McLaughlin, who had witnessed the attack, a local guy, and who afterwards called for Dr. O'Rourke to see him. Maguire was hospitalised in Adelaide Hospital in Dublin for a month afterwards and brought this case against Mulligan, which is where we get all this information from. He claimed permanent hearing loss and other injuries, which left him unable to farm anymore. Maguire initially made a complaint to the county inspector, and Sergeant Johnson, who was Mulligan's superior, made an inquiry into the incident. Not only was Mulligan not reprimanded by his superior, he was promoted to sergeant. Johnson later stated that he visited Maguire. Sergeant Johnson, Mulligan's superior, said that he visited Peter Maguire on the 25th of January and could see no visible wounds to the head. He also stated that as far as he was concerned, Maguire's hearing was fine. This is totally against what the doctor said. In a hearing at the King's Bench in Dublin in June 1921, Peter Maguire's action against Sergeant Mulligan was moved from Cavan to Enniskillen, as Mulligan had claimed that he would not get a fair hearing in Cavan, as there was a hostility towards the police there. Maguire lost the case. During the course of the trial, all of those involved, excepting Constable Allen, spoke, and the judge held in favour of Mulligan and used his summing up to excoriate the Maguires in an extraordinarily aggressive statement. Beginning his summing up, the judge stated that one could always tell from one's knowledge of County Cavan people when they were going to lie and when they were going to tell the truth. He went on to say that Peter, Owen and Michael McGoldrick were liars, and that Owen was a coward of a boy who hid behind his father. It's very rough stuff. He took evidence of the police at face value. So any eyewitness reports from Maguire and his side were totally not regarded, and all the eyewitness reports of the RIC were held up as being truthful, with no evidence of this. No second-hand evidence or further evidence. And so he took the evidence of the police to say at face value, and he found in favour of Mulligan with costs, which came to £62, 6 shillings and 8 pence, which would have been ruinous for Peter Maguire. So Peter was going to have to pay the costs. Not only had he lost, he was going to have to pay for it as well. And there's a letter dated the 29th of December 1921 from Swanlinbar Sinn Féin branch to Ballyconnell, where they wrote to Frank Dolphin. Frank was the secretary of Ballyconnell Sinn Féin, telling him that the Sinn Féin branches in Swanlinbar, Templeport and Curla had all held dances on St. Stephen's Night 1921 in aid of Peter Maguire to help pay for his costs, and asking the Ballyconnell Sinn Féin would do the same to hold a fundraiser for Peter to help him out of this financial hole that he was in. But as is the way with all things, life carried on, and a tender for the rebuilding of Swanlinbar Creamery appeared in the Fermanagh Herald on the 22nd of January 1921. And they made quick work of it, because it was reported on the 2nd of September 1921 that the creamery in Swanlinbar had restarted and had been partly rebuilt and new machinery installed. And a very close eye was kept on the RIC in Swanlinbar going forward. In the Dolphin Archive are kept very detailed surveillance notes taken by the IRA in Swanlinbar, in which the movement of Crown forces in that area are very closely detailed. One report, which is of particular interest and which is dated 1921, the month is destroyed there. You can see 1921 on the top right. But this is a report which notes the presence of about 20 of what are termed the enemy in Swanlinbar, the high number of which speaks to the tension that must have been in the area following the attack. And 9 black and tans are listed, 10 RIC and a district officer, most of whom were living in barracks, except the DI and 2 sergeants who were living outside the barracks. The DI was staying in the local spa hotel. Another sergeant who was living in private accommodation was away on leave. And there's a note highlighted at the bottom of the page, which stated that there is no hotel porter. You can see it at the bottom right of the page there, kind of squared off. Presumably at the Spa Hotel, which meant that it would have been relatively easy to enter the hotel unobserved. Now, we can only guess why the IRA might have been interested in doing so, but it seems that the recent violent events in Swanlinbar would not be forgotten easily by either side. So my thanks to Emma Clancy, the county librarian, for all of her help and support while I do these webisodes. My sincere thanks to Jonathan Smith and to Sinead Rice as well, also of the Library Service in Cavan, for all of their help and support. My sincere thanks to Frankie Dolphin for donating all this wonderful material to the Library Service, which meant that I could do this research. My thanks to the Anglo-Celt and to the local newspapers as well, which hold so much information from the time, which is so invaluable when we're doing this kind of work as well. And my sincere thanks to all of you for watching as well. There's going to be more of these coming out in the coming months as well, so keep an eye out for those as well. Thank you very much.